So I've been looking forward to this documentary since it was first announced, and it's finally here now. Peacock and WWE presents Becoming Cody Rhodes, The American Nightmare. This is a 2-hour documentary put together by Peacock and WWE, of course, Bruce Pritchard and Vince McMahon as the executive producers, that go over the story of Cody Rhodes' career up until this point. And it actually goes back even further into telling the story of Cody and his relationship both professionally and personally with his father, the legendary American Dream Dusty Rhodes. And it goes all the way back to Cody being a young kid and getting on the football team and learning how to wrestle amateur, but always in the back of his head kind of wanting to be like his father, but knowing that his father's a legitimate legend, like the Babe Ruth of wrestling. And it would be difficult for him. And it kind of goes through his whole career from eventually working OVW to getting called up to the main roster, working as part of Legacy, then later on becoming Stardust and that whole saga, leaving, going to New Japan. They actually had footage from New Japan in this documentary, eventually forming the coalition, that is to say, of the Elite and the historic show All In from 2018 that many of you probably remember was the birth of AEW, even though it isn't really an AEW show back then. AEW rose from the ashes of All In, and it talks a little bit about AEW in this documentary. In fact, Cody sets the record straight that he did not leave AEW for money. He left it because of personal reasons. I'm not going to go into too much of that here on this video. There's a lot to speculate about that, but it obviously would go from that story and then goes into his WWE return, his pectoral injury last summer, and him toughing it out against Seth Rollins in the Hell in a Cell, and of course his big road to WrestleMania journey and him eventually not defeating Roman Reigns. But of course the story's not over yet. Along the way, we get to meet Cody and his family. He talks about his relationship with Brandy, how they first met, the story of how he developed the American Nightmare character, and it really goes into his head about what he was thinking during his career. He's still a young guy, and he's got many years left ahead of him, but like it or not, man, Cody Rhodes is a very, very big, important part of WWE right now as one of the top faces in the company, and really the guy who is in many ways the leader of Raw. He's one of the main characters of Raw, the Raw brand, and I do believe still that next year at WrestleMania, he is going to be the guy to beat Roman Reigns for the title. We'll see what happens. But when it comes to this documentary, I will say this. If you're a wrestling fan and you've been around the block or you've at least followed the business, a lot of the stuff in this documentary you're going to know. Like, you know about Cody's journey. You know about Legacy. It interviews Randy Orton. No, nothing with Ted DiBiase, surprisingly, but it does interview Randy Orton. Diamond Dallas Page is on this documentary. There's some clips of Dusty Rhodes that were used posthumously. There are interviews with Bruce Pritchard, who was the guy that Cody called, or that called him, when he was a free agent in 2022 to come back to WWE. So if you know the story of Cody Rhodes, the story itself, even though it is a really cool journey of the prodigal son leaving the company, coming back as a man, literally coming back as a man, it's a great story. If you don't know anything about Cody, or you know very little, maybe just his AEW run and some of his WWE run, there's going to be a lot of good things on here that you're going to enjoy. I really like how the first 30 or so minutes of the documentary really focus on the overarching theme of Cody living in the shadow of Dusty Rhodes. And they interview people like, I mentioned, Randy Orton, who has a legendary father, Charlotte Flair, who is obviously the daughter of Ric Flair, and they interview people who have been in those shoes before. It's very difficult to be the offspring of somebody so respected like Dusty Rhodes, such a pivotal part of the wrestling business for 4 or 5 decades, even going into the current era, because they do talk about all the people that Dusty Rhodes was assisting in their training at FCW and NXT and developmental, including Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins and many others. And the impact that Cody Rhodes has had on the business even up until today. I'm sorry, Dusty Rhodes. And so Cody, at great lengths, discusses how there was a weird sort of juxtaposition here, because Cody partially wanted to be like his father. He idolized his father. He was, as he would say, he's his dad's biggest fan. But at the same time, he also wanted to sort of walk his own steps. He wanted to, follow in his own life and be his own man. And the documentary does a great job, I think, of really following that and giving us and painting that picture. Now, of course, because wrestling fans are oftentimes are very immature and tribalistic, I think the big controversy coming out of this is the fact that Triple H, when discussing Cody coming back to WWE, refers to AEW, albeit not directly, as a second-rate company or number two. Now, look, whether or not you like AEW or WWE more, that's irrelevant. The reality is that AEW is number two. Yes, AEW is going to have a huge show with All In August. Yes, AEW is growing little by little. No argument there. They got a new TV show, Collision, on Saturdays, but they're still a new company. AEW is a very young company. They've only been around 4 years, and WWE, going all the way back to Capital Wrestling, has been around for 70, 80 years. No matter who you are and no matter how much of a meteoric rise AEW has had, you're just not going to be number one over WWE because they've been there so long. You know what I mean? Just the mere fact that WWE has existed as long as it has is going to put a damper in anybody who thinks that AEW is equal to or greater than WWE. Now, could AEW someday overcome WWE as far as popularity goes? I think while that's possible, I don't foresee that being the case right now. Nevertheless, they are growing, but they're still number two. And they're probably the closest number two since WCW. That's the good news. But wrestling fans getting mad at that comment to me is pretty dumb because this documentary, despite it being a WWE production, actually does respect AEW. They even show like still pictures of like Tony Khan and the Young Bucks and sort of like how they put together, what would become All In and would later become AEW. And they don't just... The documentary wasn't like a hit piece against AEW by any means. Cody was very respectful of his time there, and people were talking about like, yeah, he left WWE and started his own thing, and we all respect him for that. Like it or not, Cody helping out to create AEW, I'm sure that people within WWE respect it. But the bottom line is the fact the Young Bucks were on this documentary, all it tells me, and they weren't interviewed, but there's footage of them like from Cody's phone or whatever, from YouTube maybe, all that tells me is that this documentary would never have worked if it was made in 2006, 2007. Remember, there was a time where WWE documentaries would never acknowledge like TNA or competitive, other companies. Now AEW, who is the number two American wrestling company and one that is definitely a big company. It's not an Impact Wrestling. It's not a GCW. It's a legitimate TV product. Having them even mention AEW and even doing it respectfully, I think was a shocker to a lot of people in a time when, if you remember, they would never do that. Again, there is that line from Triple H, but that's not really what this is about. It's about the fact that even Cody being the EVP of AEW, like him wanting to be the top guy in the business, as much as it may hurt people, you're not going to do that in New Japan or AEW. The fact is, to be the man, you've got to be on top of WWE. And that's what Triple H was saying. I mean, that's literally what he was saying there with that comment. I don't think he was insulting AEW. But I want to get back to the documentary because I don't want this to turn into that topic. There was a lot of interviews with Cody's family. His sister's on here, his mother, about his reactions to certain things. And he does give his take. He talks about, they show the eulogy when Dusty passed away. He does get very emotional. They even discuss some things I didn't even know about, like the fact that him and Xavier Woods went to like rival high schools. And they were both amateur wrestlers. That was pretty cool. There was some cool information there. They also, address how Cody was feeling about coming back and why he chose to leave, why he ultimately decided to walk out on WWE and be his own man. And he does go into that. If you've watched his interviews, you've kind of gotten a clue about these kinds of things, but here it's Cody saying it on a WWE-produced documentary. And that's good. One of the cool things they did here was they themed it. Like, they talked about the Forbidden Door, not the show, but like the concept behind it. And Cody Like, they had this thing where Cody was like walking through the desert and finding inside the desert sand different artifacts that represented his career. The dashing Cody Rhodes mask that he wore when Ray broke his face, he broke his nose. When they found like the mirror, the whole dashing thing. They showed him finding like the superstar Billy Graham version of the world heavyweight title. Like, I really liked that was sort of the wraparound story behind the documentary. That's some great editing work, and it gave the story a theme. So overall, like, if you're a fan of WWE and you've been following the business for 20 years, or for at least maybe 15, you're going to pretty much know the story pretty well, although the actual like spoken messages from Cody and his friends and family were important. Nothing truly revolutionary here, except for a few little things here and there that I didn't even know about the guy. If you don't know anything about Cody Rhodes, it's a great piece to catch you up to learning about Cody Rhodes. If you are newer to wrestling for the past few years, or if you're one of those fans that stopped watching until recently, this is a great way to catch up. With that being said, let me know what you thought about becoming Cody Rhodes. I'll see y'all tomorrow.